Hi, greetings, lords and ladies. We're going to look at Game of Thrones Season 3 now continues on with the episode, and now his watch is ended. So beginning in the Riverlands, Jaime Lannister has had his sword hand cut off by Locke. The following day, Locke's men lead their prisoners Jaime and Brienne of Tarth back to Harrenhal on horseback. Locke is gaining maximum enjoyment from torturing someone who can't possibly fight back. He ties Jaime's severed hand right onto a rope and hangs it around Jaime's neck, forcing Jaime to smell the flesh of his own hand rotting. Jaime is physically in agony from his wound, feverish and half delirious. He is barely conscious and falls headlong off his horse into the mud. Locke has been tormenting Jaime by not giving him water, and he is almost dying of thirst. One of Locke's men moves to give him water, but instead empties the canteen over Jaime's head to taunt him. Jaime weakly tries to point out that if he actually dies, Locke and his men will be in serious trouble, but Locke simply dismisses this. Locke then hands him a container, which desperately guzzles down rapidly, too weak to notice what it is. Locke then points out that he filled the container with horse piss just to torment Jaime, who vomits. Jaime can barely move, but Locke viciously kicks him repeatedly. In a surge of effort, Jaime manages to steal the sword from one of Locke's men, but Jaime is so weak and feverish that he can barely stand, much less wield a sword, and he cannot fight as well with his left hand as he could his sword hand. Jaime soon realizes this, and actually isn't trying to fight them off anymore, but instead to provoke one of them to kill him so he doesn't have to go on living like this, and can die with the small dignity of having a sword in his hand. He succumbs to exhaustion, and Locke doesn't even bother to punish him this time, just warning him that if he tries again, he'll cut off his other hand. Later that night, Jaime and Brienne are restrained near a campfire. Jaime refuses to eat and says he wants to die. Brienne says he should try to live for revenge, but Jaime says he was that hand, and without a sword hand, even if he escapes, he has nothing, and would rather die as a Jaime he was than go on living, robbed of his very identity. Brienne goes angry, insinuating to Jaime that this is the first time he's had to face the real world where things people care about get taken away, but he's pathetically moping around like a woman. Her criticism and strength convinces Jaime to start eating. Brienne says she overheard when he earlier managed to talk Locke out of letting his men gang rape her, by convincing him that her father will pay Locke her weight in sapphires. While Brienne is a noble woman and worth a ransom, Tarth is called the Sapphire Isle due to the color of the seas around it, not because there are any actual sapphires, and House Tarth is not particularly rich. Brienne is completely confused, and asks Jaime why he helped her, but he doesn't answer. Elsewhere in the Riverlands, Arya Stark and Gendry are kept hooded as Thoros of Myr and his men lead them into a cave, Hollow Hill, which serves as a secret hideout of the Brotherhood Without Banners. Sandor the Hound Clegane is brought with him in restraints, and is confronted by the leader of the Brotherhood, Sir Beric Dondarrion. Sir Beric was commanded by none other than Eddard Stark to lead a group of soldiers to track down and bring to justice the false knight Sir Gregor Clegane, when he started raiding the Riverlands under Tywin Lannister's orders at the very beginning of the War of the Five Kings. This subsequently became trapped by Lannister lines, but continued to harass their forces by forming the Brotherhood. Over time, however, they began to realize how much suffering was being inflicted on the small folk of the Riverlands by Stark and Lannister forces alike, and began to defend the commoners from raiders from both sides of the war. Over time, they were joined by Stark deserters, Baratheon deserters, and commoners who wanted to defend their homes. Dondarrion says he's still following the mission that Eddard Stark sent him on, to bring Gregor Clegane to justice and restore King Robert's peace to the Riverlands. The Hound bucks that Eddard and Robert are dead now, and he can't just be fighting for ghosts, but Dondarrion says that now the Brotherhood are ghosts, attacking the Lannisters where they least expect them, melting away back to their hideouts in the woods. The Brotherhood points out that Lannister alliance have been butchering the innocent. At the outbreak of the war, Dondarrions were ambushed in the battle at the Mummers Ford, where girls as young as 7 were raped and babies were cut in half in front of their parents. Sandor points out that he wasn't at Mummers Ford. The Brotherhood continues to cite various Lannister crimes. Thoreau says he was there during the Second King's Landing and saw the butchered corpses of the royal children, Rhaenys and Aegon Targaryen. Sandor continues to point out that he wasn't present for these crimes, and many of them were in fact committed by his older brother Gregor, who personally killed the baby Aegon, then raped and killed his mother Elia. Sandor says that they can't kill him for the crime of being born into House Clegane and being related to Gregor. He also scoffs at how Dondarrion and many of his men have converted to the Lord of Light religion, of which Thoros is a priest. Arya then speaks up and angrily accuses Sandor of killing her friend Micah, the butcher's boy, of singing his corpse over his horse like a deer. Sandor matter-of-factly admits that he killed Micah, but says he was in no place to question then Prince Joffrey's orders. The Brotherhood, closing on something Sandor actually did, charged him with the crime of following orders to kill Micah, but that they will give him a fair trial. Dondarrion himself will face Sandor in a trial by combat. Dun dun dun. Anyway, in King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister meets with Varys, who is in the middle of prying open a large wooden crate. Tyrion asks Varys to help him confirm who sent Sir Mandenmore to kill him during the Battle of the Blackwater. Varys says he would like to help, but the most he has are whispers that it was Cersei, but only whispers, and he cannot confirm who gave the order. Tyrion wants to know with certainty if it was his sister so he can take revenge. Varys uses this opportunity to finish the conversation they were having on the eve of the battle, in which Varys promised to reveal how he was castrated. Varys says that he used to be a slave in a traveling troupe that passed through all the free cities, but as he was a Emir, he was sold to a sorcerer. The sorcerer gave him a potion that temporarily paralyzed him while still leaving him fully aware and able to experience pain. Then he cut his genitals off, root and stem, shaft and testes. The sorcerer needed his genitals as a sacrifice for his spell, and he burned Varys' genitals in a brazier of fire. What Varys has recurring nightmares about to this day is not the sorcerer or the knife or the pain, but that when the sorcerer prayed to the blue flames in a ceremony, a voice clearly answered him from the flames. Whether it was a god or a demon or secretly parlor tricks, Varys never knew, as the sorcerer threw him out into the street to die. But he was determined to live, despite the sorcerer, and one day get his revenge on him. Varys did whatever it took to claw his way up into his position of influence in the world. First, to survive, he would beg, steal, or sell the sexual use of the parts of his body he still had. Increasingly, he discovered that stealing men's secrets was far more profitable than anything physical which could be stolen. In a time, he worked his way up from the slums of Myr to the small council in King's Landing. This is why Varys has always hated those who claimed to wield magical powers, and particularly why he opposed Stannis Baratheon, who relies on the Red Priestess Melisandre. As Varys finishes his long tale, he finally finishes prying the last nail out of the crate and opens it. To Tyrion's astonishment, it contains an elderly sorcerer, the very same one that castrated Varys so many years ago. He is still alive but gagged, and was shipped to Varys in the crate. Using his own life as an example, Varys thus urges Tyrion to be patient, and his revenge will come to him in time. Varys then closes the crate, with the sorcerer still inside. Varys visits Ross, who has been secretly spying on Littlefinger for him. He is surprised to hear a report from the other prostitutes in the brothel on the prodigious activities of one Podrick Payne. Varys is perplexed as to what exactly happened. Ross says the girl told her he wasn't particularly large or anything, so much as what he did. When she repeatedly asked him exactly what that was, the most he could say is that it was hard to describe. She then reports on how frequently Littlefinger has visited Sansa Stark, and says she thinks he is obsessed with her and wants to smuggle her out of the city. He asks why she thinks this is true, and she presents a stolen copy of the ship's manifest for the boat that will take Littlefinger to the Vale. Varys is surprised that Ross is literate and asks what obvious point it is that he doesn't see. She points out there will be 2 feather beds, and Varys realizes Littlefinger would only pay the extra money for someone other than Littlefinger if it was Sansa. Joffrey and Marjorie take a tour of the Great Sept of Baelor, where the royal wedding is to be held. Cersei Lannister and Olenna Tyrell follow. Joffrey excitedly relates tales of the darker chapters of the Great Sept's history, to Marjorie's faint interest and Cersei's annoyance. Olenna asks if Robert Baratheon was buried with the Targaryen kings of the Great Sept. Cersei explains that they left instructions to return his remains to Storm's End. When Cersei dismisses the accident that claimed Robert's life, Olenna laments her son's total lack of military prowess. Cersei points out that Olenna's son, Lord Mace Tyrell, besieged Storm's End for almost a full year during Robert's rebellion, but Olenna scoffs at her oath of a son is no warrior, and the only thing he laid siege to was a banquet table in the command tent. Olenna muses on the shortcomings of the men in their lives and the arrangement of patriarchy in general, to which Cersei wistfully says that it is the will of the gods. Thus distracted, Margaery convinces Joffrey to greet the crowd outside. Having been somewhat placated by Margaery's charity, the crowd happily cheers for the pair of them. Cersei realizes she has lost control of Joffrey to the Tyrells. Subsequently, Cersei meets with her father Tywin in his chambers. She wants to ensure that he is doing everything he can to find Jaime. Tywin dismissively points out that he started a war when his hated dwarf son Tyrion was captured by the Starks, so surely he is willing to do even more now for his elder son. Tywin makes it clear that he considers Jaime his heir, despite the fact that as a Kingsguard member, Jaime has officially renounced all rights to inheritance. Tyrion previously noted that he is next in line of succession after Jaime, as younger son inherits before an older daughter, but Tywin said he would never let his hated dwarf son be his heir. Cersei points out that, as she is next in line of succession, maybe Tywin should consider her the real heir to his legacy, not his son's. She claims she is the only one of his children who ever took his lectures on family and legacy seriously. She points out that for a man who pays a lot of service to family and legacy, he excludes her from his plans. Tywin confirms that he excludes Cersei from his plans, but not because she is a woman. He distrusts her because she isn't nearly as smart as she thinks she is. He sneers that she has allowed Joffrey to run roughshod over her, the city, and its people, and intends to rein in his grandson's deranged behavior. Cersei says she is afraid of the growing influence of the Tyrells at court, and something must be done about them. In particular, Cersei is nervous about how skilled Margaery Tyrell is at manipulating Joffrey. Tywin bluntly responds that it's good someone has finally been able to manipulate Joffrey, and Cersei herself has proven to be incapable of doing it. She says Tywin should try stopping Joffrey from doing what he likes, implying he will find it extremely difficult. But her father firmly responds, "I will." Meanwhile, Olenna is seated in the gardens with two of Margaery's cousins. One of them embroiders a golden Tyrell rose with their motto, "Growing Strong," which prompts Olenna to complain that their family has the dullest sigil and motto in the Seven Kingdoms. Other families have interesting mottos like "Winter is coming" or "We do not sow," and have Tyrells and krakens for sigils. Varys arrives to meet with Olenna and she shoos the girls away. They walk through the gardens, and when Olenna remains relatively polite, she instantly sees through all Varys' pleasantries. Varys is verbally outmatched for once, and she asks him to just get to the point. He says that he is extremely worried that Littlefinger is going to try to take control of Sansa Stark. With her upstairs, younger brothers presumed dead in Winterfell, and Arya Stark missing and presumed dead for over a year. Sansa is Robb's only heir. The War of the Five Kings is not going well for the Starks now, and if Robb were to be defeated and die, the man who controls Sansa controls the North. Varys says that while he enjoys sparring with Baelish, he is truly horrified by the man. While they are all engaged in the intrigues and murders of court politics, Baelish has utterly no limits on what he will do to achieve power. He would burn the entire realm down if it meant he could be king of the ashes. Olenna agrees and says that the solution is rather obvious. Shortly thereafter, Margaery Tyrell finds Sansa Stark praying in the Red Keep's Godswood, overlooking Blackwater Bay. She dismisses the Lannister guards, threatening to tell the king they refused her if they don't leave, and engages in pleasant small talks. Margaery plays a small joke on Sansa by saying that her cousin died of a pox which made her face melt off, but is just trying to brighten her spirits. In the process, is reminded that Sansa is still somewhat naive. Margaery then invites Sansa to visit Highgarden in the Reach someday. Sansa is confused, as Queen Cersei won't allow her to leave the city, but Marjorie points out that Queen Regent Cersei might not want her to, but Queen Marjorie will be happy to share Highgarden's pageantry with a friend, or a sister. Marjorie points out that if Sansa were to marry Loras, then she would belong in Highgarden anyway. The thought of escaping Joffrey, being wed to her idol, and becoming a Tyrell makes Sansa choke out tears of joy. Aww. Anyway, in the north, Bran Stark is having a shared greenside room with Jojen Reed. They are walking through the woods and see the Red Raven again. Jojen advises Bran that he must follow the Raven, and when he is confused, Georgia points out Theon must follow by climbing a tree. Bran begins to climb the tree that the raven has landed in, but he soon becomes terrified, remembering the fall that crippled him when he was climbing a tower at Winterfell. He has a vivid dream memory of his mother Catelyn, repeating her warning in which she made him promise never to climb again, a promise which he broke, and this indirectly led to the fall which crippled him. Bran is so terrified of the memory of Catelyn yelling at him that he falls off the tree. Bran and Jojo awake in their camp in the woods, disappointed that he could not follow the three-eyed raven. Elsewhere, apparently in the north, Theon Greyjoy is being led by the boy who set him free from the dungeon and then rescued him by killing his captors when they tried to recapture him. He says that he is leading Theon to Deepwood Motte, a castle on the west coast of the north which was captured by his sister Yara. He says he is concerned that some of the guards may betray Theon, so it's best to sneak into the castle through the drains until he reaches his sister in person. As the boy fumbles around with keys at a locked gate, Theon sinks to the ground and asks if his father Balon knows he was taken captive. The boy says he doesn't know, but Theon says he probably did, but left him for dead. Filled with remorse, Theon laments that his real father died when his head was cut off at King's Landing, that he had a choice between two families, and he chose wrong. Theon says that now he has destroyed everything he ever cared about, and his real home Winterfell was burned to the ground. He also says that the only thing he ever resented about Robb Stark is that Robb could effortlessly be the kind of good man that Theon truly wanted to be, but had to struggle against his own feelings to be like. Theon even apologizes aloud for having two innocent orphan boys killed, so in desperation he could pass them off as Bran and Rickon Stark. The boy is surprised. Theon explains to him that Bran and Rickon escaped, so had to fake their deaths so he wouldn't seem weak. The boy leads Theon into a dark chamber of the castle, and he calls out for Yara. The boy then lights a torch, from the same egg-shaped cross that Theon was chained to when he was being tortured before. Theon was led in a complete circle, back to the very same dungeon he escaped from in the first place. Other guards come in, and the boy shouts to tie Theon up again, where he belongs, and it was Theon who killed the other guards when he tried to escape, instead of him. The boy, giving commands, is revealed to be one of the head torturers, and Theon's entire escape that led him on was nothing more than another form of torture, sadistically toying with him. Anyway, beyond the wall. At Craster's Keep, tensions were high among the members of the Night's Watch, who sought shelter there after escaping the devastating defeat at the Battle of the Fist of the First Men. Grennan are settling pig shit, but the former rapist Ras urges them that they are not safe here and cannot trust Craster. The men sacrifice his newborn sons to the White Walkers, and there's every probability that the White Walkers do come, hand over the Night's Watch survivors to his real masters. Gren and Ed don't want to discuss it. Samuel Charlie visits Scaly, who is deeply distraught about the fate of her newborn son. She's frantic, and tells Sam not to draw attention to the fact that it's a boy by calling it a he so loud, as Craster will want to offer it up as a sacrifice when he finds out it's a son. He asks her if she's decided on a name. She responds that there's no point in naming her baby if it's only going to be offered up as a human sacrifice. She gives Sam back his mother's thimble and says she doesn't care about such stupid things. All she's focused on is protecting the life of her baby. Some of their wounded have died from their injuries, and Lord Commander Jorah Mormont leads a funeral service as they burn the corpse of a man named Bannon on a pyre. Mormont didn't know the man well, but he rode bravely into the unknown lands far beyond the wall, fought valiantly at the fist against monsters which they didn't even know existed, and they will never see a man that brave again. He closes the eulogy with a traditional closing line for members of the Night's Watch, and now his watch is ended, which the assembled men repeat. In the main hall, Lord Commander Mormont is checking a map in his journal, and Craster continues to crassly berate the men of the Night's Watch. Mormont says that they have to stay long enough for their wounded to recover sufficiently to be fit to travel. But Craster waves this off, saying they'll recover as much as they ever will. Craster openly suggests that they should just kill the men who are so severely wounded that they won't be able to travel. And if Mormont is reluctant to do the deed himself, he could just leave and Craster will finish him off. Mormont declines. Another young Night's Watch man, Carl Tanner, comes in to complain that Craster is feeding them nothing but bread cut with sawdust, and he wants to know where Craster keeps his hidden larder. Meanwhile, Craster is sitting there getting quite drunk on the wine they gifted to him when they first came. Craster is in the accusations, and Craster admits that he has winter stockpiles, but needs those to feed his women and refuses to share them. Rast calls Cresser a bastard, at which Cresser becomes enraged and threatens Rast with an axe. Mormon restrains Rast. Aggressive shots like throwing them all out to lie down outside in the cold on their empty bellies. Cresser says he will chop off the next man who calls him a bastard. A tense moment of silence passes. Mormon grabs Rast, sealing him by the doorway. When Carl, firmly staring directly at Cresser, challenges him and calls him a daughter-fucking wildling bastard. Cresser lunges forward at Carl in a blind rage, but he's drunk and clumsy. Without flinching, Carl holds off Cresser's axe with his left hand, using his right hand to ram a dagger through the old man's throat, which goes up the roof of his mouth. He flings the dying Cresser to the ground, then punches one of Cresser's wives who is present, demanding to know where the hidden food is kept. Lord Commander Mormon bells that the gods will curse him for this, as the guest killing a host most firmly accepted him into his home breaks all the laws of gods and men. Carl shouts that there are no laws beyond the wall. Carl continues to threaten the girl with a knife, so Mormon draws his sword, which makes Carl drop the girl and begin to face off against Mormon with his dagger. Suddenly, Rast comes up from behind Mormon and literally stabs the Lord Commander in the back, which makes Mormon drop his sword. For a brief moment, the men stare in shock. The Grand charges and tackles Carl. The entire room explodes into pure bedlam. The desperate Night's Watch recruits like Rast, mostly conservative criminals exiled to the wall, turning officers who are loyal to Mormon, and also the uncommon recruits like Grant who stay loyal. Quick flashes of the fight go by as no one can really perceive what's happening, and the mutiny spreads around Cresser's keep. In the midst of it, Mormon turns around to fight off Rast. Mormon may have a knife in his back, but he is twice Rast's size and completely enraged. Mormon grabs Rast by the throat and lifts him off his feet, one-handed, then spins around and hurls him against the opposite wall. Still choking Rast, Mormon really succeeds in crushing Rast's windpipe with his bare hand, but then Mormon starts to cough up thick red blood. His knife wound is mortal. The injured Mormon then sinks to the ground and continues to cough up blood. Now that Mormon is on the ground unarmed and helpless, Rast grabs a knife and repeatedly pounds it into Mormon's throat until the old bear is dead. Meanwhile, Sam rushes to Gilly's side and orders her that they have to escape now or they never will. Sam runs out of Cresser's keep with Gilly and her baby. Also, Night's Watch members fall to the mutineers, who also kill or rape Cresser's other wives. Gilly leads the way into the night because she knows the woods around her home. Covered in Mormon's blood, Rast shouts into the darkness that Piggy can run for now, but soon he'll be cutting Sam's throat too. Ugh. Anyway, finally, at the city of Astapor in Slaver's Bay, Daenerys Targaryen arrives before Krasnus, Monaclos, and the other slave masters of the city, with her Dothraki guards carrying the largest of her dragons, Drogon, in his large cage. Daenerys accompanied by her Queen's Guard members, Ser Jorah Mormont and Ser Barristan Selmy. Missandei the translator gave it to Daenerys at her request, and now is dressed in higher quality clothing which matches Dany's style of dress. All 8,000 of the unsullied warrior eunuchs are gathered in the city's main square for the transaction. The other upperclassmen and women of Astapor crowd around the square, gawking at the dragon while slaves in heavy chains serve them refreshments. Crassus tells Daenerys, via Missandei's interpretation of Valyrian, that many of the unsullied have not yet seen battle, and we should do well to blood them early, having them attack some minor cities and towns here and there on our way to Westeros. The slave empress will happily purchase any slave she captures, so it's a win-win situation. He also rightly notes that any young boys she sells as slaves will be castrated and ready to serve as new unsullied when their training is over in about 10 years' time. Daenerys lets her dragon out of his cage and leaves it on a long chain leash attached to its foot as it hovers about 20 feet in the air. She then has the leash to Krasnus, and in return gives her a cat of 9 tails with a hilt shaped like a harpy, signifying ownership of the unsullied. Daenerys asks if it is done, and Krasnus impatiently says that it is, as he struggles to rein in the dragon. To the surprise of Missandei, Daenerys calls the unsullied to attention in Valyrian, and proceeds to test them with basic Valyrian marching commands. She bows slightly, knowing that they are now hers. Too stark to notice, Krasnus complains for Missandei to tell the bitch that the dragon won't come when he commands. Daenerys turns to face Krasnus and blatantly says a dragon is not a slave, and can imperfectly accent Valyrian. When Devon Krasnus demands an explanation, she declares that she is Daenerys Stormbrand of House Targaryen, of the blood of old Valyria. Valyrian is her mother tongue, indicating she she'd been feigning ignorance the entire time, putting up Crassus's insulting comments to lull them to a false sense of security. Daenerys then addresses the thousands of Unsullied and orders them to kill all of the slave masters in Astapor, along with all their household soldiers and any man who holds a whip. She cautions them to spare any children and strike the chains of any slave they see. The Unsullied obey her commands without question, and instantly begin attacking all of these humbled slave masters. Horrified, Crassus frantically shouts for someone to kill Daenerys, to which she calmly orders Dracarys. Drogon breathes fire under Crassus, completely engulfing the slave in flames as he thrashes about in his death throes. Her dragon then flies across the upper walls, where the other high-ranking slave masters are watching, burning them all to death. The Unsullied proceeds to sack the entire city, slaughtering the slave masters and freeing fellow slaves, supported by the fire of Daenerys' dragons. After the sack of Astapor is finished, Daenerys walks past Crassus' charred remains, mounts a white horse, and addresses her Unsullied. She declares that they have spent their entire lives as slaves, but now she sets them free. If any man wishes to leave, she will not stop him, and no harm will come to him if he goes. She asks the Unsullied to stay and fight for her, not as slaves, but as free men. For a moment the Unsullied stare blankly. They have never known what freedom is. Then one starts tapping the end of his spear against the ground to support, and then the others join in, until thousands of Unsullied are triumphantly striking their spears against the ground in praise of Daenerys. She asks what her brother dreamed about for 17 years but can never find, an army with which to reconquer the 7 kingdoms. Daenerys strides triumphantly out of the smoking wreck of Astapor and drops the slave master's whip on the ground. The Unsullied trample the whip with their feet as they march past. She rides out with her 8,000 strong army of Unsullied marching in formation, as her 3 dragons fly above them. For the first time in generations, a Targaryen has begun to conquer again, beginning the liberation of Slaver's Bay. Nice. So anyway, let's take a look at some notes surrounding this episode. And now his watch is ended is a phrase commonly used at the end of a eulogy in a funeral for a member of the Night's Watch. Symbolically, it signifies Lord Commander Jorah Mormont's death in this episode. The soundtrack playing over the end credits is a rendition of Daenerys' theme and the Unsullied theme. It did not appear in the official soundtrack release. The Robb and Catelyn storyline, the Stannis and Dragonstone storyline, and the Jon Snow / Ygritte / Wildling storyline did not appear in this episode. Peter Baelish left his position as Master of Coin last episode, thus he does not appear in this episode, though Ross says he hasn't left the city yet. Bran and Jojen Reed do briefly appear, but Rickon, Mira Reed, Osha, and Hodor do not. Technically, Catelyn does appear, but only Bran's dream. Tyrion is only briefly in the episode, during the early scene with Varys. This episode marks the debut of the new interior set for the Great Sept of Baelor. It features a new, partially CGI exterior of the main entrance. Earlier in Season 1 episode Baelor, Eddard Stark was executed on the steps of the Great Sept of Baelor, but the design for the building hadn't been finalized yet, so much of the building remained off camera. This episode marks the first time that Cersei has actually shared a significant scene interacting with her father, Tywin, personally exchanging dialogue with each other. They did briefly share some scenes of Blackwater and Valar Morghulis, but these scenes were in front of the entire court, and they weren't interacting directly. In the preceding episode of Rock of Punishment, they were also seen together at the small council meeting, but didn't directly exchange any dialogue. This episode makes it clear that Tywin's relationship with Cersei is almost as anachronous as his relationship with Tyrion. Arya wants Sandor the Hound Clegane to be punished for killing Micah, the butcher's boy, on Joffrey's orders, which happened all the way back in the Season 1 episode, The King's Road. Eddard himself gave Beric Dondarrion the mission of leading men to bring Gregor the Mountain Clegane to justice back in the Season 1 episode, A Golden Crown. The character Dondarrion briefly appeared in that episode, but was just played by an extra, as the production team knew Dondarrion wouldn't reappear until Season 3, so they keep their casting options open until then. Daenerys is not being poetic when she says Old Valyrian is her mother tongue. She was raised in the Free Cities since she was an infant, and the people of Free Cities speak different dialects of Valyrian. Viserys was a boy when they fled Westeros, so he knew the common tongue of Westeros and insisted that Daenerys learn the language of the homeland they needed to take back, but otherwise, most people Daenerys interacted with during her entire life in exile in the Free Cities was spoken Valyrian. In spite of this, Potashia Low Valyrian was not heard in Winter is Coming. probably to make things simpler for the audience, and because linguist David J. Peterson hadn't been given the massive task of inventing Valerian yet, given that it wouldn't really need to appear until Season 3. There's confusion over the pronunciation of Tyrell. The official pronunciation of Tyrell is used to underscore the distance between Cersei and Tywin. Cersei says Tyrell, and Tywin says Tyrule. Even Lady Olenna has pronounced the name inconsistently. According to the TV series' official pronunciation guide developed for the cast and crew in Season 1, Tyrell is officially pronounced Tyrule. Long as it's still pronounced Tyrell, so there you go. Anyway, this episode marks the first, and so far, only time that house motto has been seen in writing during the TV series. When the Tyrell lady displays her embroidery to Lady Olenna, she included the motto growing strong underneath the golden rose sigil, which leads Olenna to comment on it in comparison to more fierce-sounding words of other houses. The heraldry used in Seven Kingdoms doesn't typically include a house motto with a sigil, i.e. the phrase winter is coming doesn't appear on Stark banners along with the Grey Direwolf. As a result, with the exception of the Tyrell lady's embroidery, house words in the TV series are only made known to the audience when characters verbalize them. According to Alex Graves in the Blu-ray commentary, during the scene between Cersei and Tywin, Lena Headey's hidden microphone fell off and was in the shot. While other crew members said they couldn't use the footage as a result, Graves was so impressed with Headey's performance in that take that he went to the computer effects department and had to spend extra time and resources to have the microphone digitally removed. Varys was originally intended to give this speech about his past to Tyrion on the eve of the Battle of the Blackwater, as he did in the novels. Due to time constraints, however, it was cut out. So in Season 2 episode Blackwater, he only considers telling Tyrion, then stops and says he'll have to wait for another time. Once the scene was moved to this later episode and they had more time with it, the detail was added in, not present in the novels. The Varys has just acquired and created the old sorcerer who castrated him. This episode begins and ends with the same form of torture, albeit to different degrees. Jaime is so relieved to be given a drink at first that he doesn't realize it's horse urine, while Theon is released only to be imprisoned again. Both methods prey on the hopes of the victim, getting their hopes of willing to have them plunged into further despair. Varys greets Olenna by telling her that the city of King's Landing is made brighter by her presence, something he already told Shae in Darkwing's dark words. As such, Olenna asks him whether this is his usual line when talking to women. Varys tells Olenna that Littlefinger would see this country burn if he could be king of the ashes. This is perhaps a reference to the novels. One of the visions Daenerys sees in the House of Undying is of her father telling someone, perhaps Rosard, "Let him, Robert, be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Let him be king of ashes. Let him be the king of ashes," referring to the wildfire plot. It's unclear whether Robert actually gave instructions to be buried in Storm's End. Maybe Cersei made that up, in order to be far away from the husband she so loathed, even after his death. Anguy tries to hound about the savage raid of the Riverlands, performed by the Mountain, as reported in the Season 1 episode, A Golden Crown. And Now His Watch Has Ended was nominated for 2 Primetime Emmy Awards in 2013. Outstanding editing for a series, and outstanding mixing for a comedy or drama series. Nice. So I think this is a pretty darn good episode, and yeah, let's just say that those slavers in Astapor really knew what they were kind of got what coming to them, so yeah. So overall, I give the episode, and Now His Watch Has Ended, 4 Iron Thrones out of 5. When I tune in tomorrow as we take a look at the next episode, Kissed by Fire. So, until then, remember everyone, winter is coming.